Jake, how we doing today?
Doing well. It is December
It is
now.
officially December. We are in the holiday season.
The holiday season comes to mind, and then making sure that anything that needs to get done before the end of the year also comes to mind. So it's like the clock starts on the last month of the year. So we've got things that we've got to get done. So and then start thinking about next year and plans we're putting together for next year.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I wasn't actually thinking about the things we need to get done. I was thinking about, the new year coming up and the fact that a lot of people start to evaluate their situations and start to do planning in the new year. That's quite frankly when we get a lot of our calls, New Year's resolutions and stuff like that. And so this year has been a pretty crazy year with lots of market ups and downs. And the other thing we've had is we've had this big increase in interest rates. So I was thinking that this would be a really good time to evaluate and have a discussion around cash. Cash was really boring for several years. You weren't earning anything on your savings account. And now with these interest rates increased, we have that opportunity to earn a little bit more. And so maybe we need to think a little bit harder about where we put our cash and how much we have on hand. You up for that discussion?
Yeah, absolutely. We do need to be, conscientious of changes in interest rates, and we absolutely need to think about where we're putting our cash. And just like you said, I mean, boring is how I would describe cash management strategies for, the past decade. Rates, even on high yielding savings or high yield CDs, have been pretty paltry. So we're kind of getting back into a territory that we've seen in the more distant past with higher rates. But we're kind of getting back into that territory now in the conversation around cash management strategy.
Yeah, not only interest rates, I think the last two market swings with the pandemic and with this, it puts a little bit more emphasis on having just cash available. So when there is a downturn,
Yeah.
when the market's going up and everything is great, you have as much cash to work as possible, and you really don't think anything of it. But when you go through these difficult times or these downturns, you start to say, hey, maybe I should have had a little more cash on the sidelines, in order to, number one, take advantage of this, which some people do, but just for protection purposes, just so you don't have to dip into your portfolio. So
I think that's a really, really good point because, I mean, just like cash, talking about rates on savings accounts and money market accounts has been boring for the past decade. I think it's been a kind of a boring topic of conversation to talk about emergency funds and liquidity and, financial situation. And the past couple of years have really brought that to the forefront. And, for folks that we work with that maintain ample cash reserves and have endured, significant transitions, namely on the employment front during the past couple of years, and through the pandemic, there's really no replacement for cash.
So how about we start out and we just say, how do you start to think about how much cash you should have on hand? So you sit down with a client, you meet with them, and one of the things we have to figure out a lot of times is how much cash do you have on hand? What's your approach to figuring that out?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's kind of a tough nut to crack in some ways. I would like to think that there's a one size fits all answer, but the truth of the matter is it is situation dependent. So the answer is it depends. But your question is kind of how do you, navigate through that it depends answer. And so we kind of look at your situation. I think right off the bat, we want to say, okay, are you working? Are you employed or are you retired? You can kind of have at that level, this fundamental distinction of kind of what kind of liquidity and cash reserves you need to be maintaining and the reasons why. If you look at, someone that's, still in their working years, not yet retired, we start with the general rule of thumb, which is 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses. Or the rule of thumb is kind of all over the place. Some people use 3 to 6 months worth of income. And then you could kind of dive down into further and say 3 to 6 months worth of net income. Or some folks say 3 to 6 months worth of non-discretionary expenses. So, even with the rule of thumb, it gets a little murky. I like 3 to 6 months worth of living expenses as that starting point for how much should you have in immediately accessible cash. So that would be
And so the purpose of
savings
having
or
that
high
emergency fund is placed into cover, you know, a loss of a job or some sort of other catastrophic, I don't want to say catastrophic, that's probably not a great word to use, but some other situation, an unexpected situation that you're in where you just should have some cash set aside just in case something happens that you're not aware of. Maybe something in your house goes bad or something of that nature.
I think the title of the episode for today
Yes,
should be
that's
Life
it.
Happens. And this is like one of the reasons for cash reserves. Life happens. We got to take the good and the bad. We got to take the expected and the unexpected. So when it comes to the cash reserves, it's there to help you navigate things that happen in life that a lot of times we don't have control over, and are unexpected. So, unexpected major home repair that isn't insured in any way or couldn't be insured in some way. Your car just dies and you need a new car, whatever that kind of situation around your auto could be. And I think especially, looking at your kind of job situation, your household job situation, and looking at the possibility of losing one or both sources of income if you're in a multiple income household.
Yeah, that's something I was going to bring up is just how you look at the job situation. Some people's jobs may be more secure than other people's jobs. If you have a two income household, maybe one person in the family's job is more secure than the other. Do you take that into consideration, like the security of the job? Do you try and evaluate that as part of that conversation?
I think it's on the table in the conversation. And one of the questions you can always, explore a little bit is what degree of confidence do you have in your job security at the moment? And whether it's a lack of feeling of security, whether that's real or imagined, it's what your response is to that question will influence what you want to have in your cash reserve. So if you kind of have a real sense that maybe job security isn't where you want it to be, there's been, a lot of changes in your particular industry, whatever it is, okay, there's kind of a real evidence-based reason why you might want to go a little bit higher on the cash reserve. Or if you've just had some, maybe you've been laid off in the past, and you just kind of are uneasy about job security, even though you're in a secure job, you may kind of have that feeling that could lead you to go higher on the cash reserve. And a lot of times the number that works is the number that lets you sleep at night. And I'll say that with a caveat, which is it can be tempting for some folks that find a lot of security and peace of mind in holding cash to go too far. And so part of the job is to say, okay, 3 to 6 months, let's tie it. What's the minimum? What's the guardrail on this side of the road? And then at what point do you have too much cash? At what point is the opportunity cost of holding cash, you're kind of losing the opportunity to put that money?
Yeah, and in the past decade, like you said, that's been significant because there was really no earnings on the cash, and so now it's gotten a little bit better, but also inflation has gotten there. The other thing I'd add to the job situation is, spending and where you are living whether you're living within your means or not living within your means. So if you have a dual income household and you're living off one income, then the risk is a little less. Even if one of you loses your job, you still have this other income to support your expenses. So you may not need to have as such a high cash reserve in place for protection purposes.
And I think that's also a really good point is, this isn't a hard and fast, the cash reserve number that we're talking about. And important, in this analysis, okay, what should you have in an emergency fund? It's also an assessment of just your overall liquidity. So you kind of need to do an assessment of all of your financial resources to say, okay, if I don't have enough cash or if I need more than what I have available in my cash reserve, where am I going to next? What are my other options? And kind of, we have an article on our blog, about this, calculating your liquid net worth. And, this type of analysis is helpful. And you end up having some homework to say, okay, what does my 401k plan allow? Do I have hardship withdrawal provisions? Can I take loans from the 401k? All this type of thing. But you're kind of identifying all the tools you have.
Yeah, some people rely on home equity lines of credit for a cash reserve also. Have you seen that a lot?
Yep, absolutely have seen that, and that's a really it's not for everyone, but when the shoe fits, that can really work well. To kind of help navigate some maybe unexpected, kind of cash needs that you may have if you don't have the amount in actual cash reserves and savings.
All right. So that's the first place we start when we're trying to figure out how much cash you need is, what emergency fund you should have on hand. And then there's other things that we need to look at in terms of, what your spending might be. If there's any big projects coming up or any large purchases that you might make, tax bills, anything like that you want to plan for as part of the process.
Yeah, like, talking about the emergency fund and, that in a lot of ways handles, kind of captures the unexpected, the life happens category of things that you maybe can't necessarily control. But there are always going to be things we're going to need cash for that we can plan on, or even loosely plan on. You can say, okay, maybe, and it could be employment related. Maybe there's a job opportunity that could come up in the future that I might need to relocate across the country. Maybe in that part of the country, it's, higher cost of housing, whatever it is, there could be reasons why you'd want to save more in cash. Or it could be something like, yep, I've got a new car that I need to purchase in a couple of years. I want to have a little bit more for a down payment on that. Any of those large types of expenses that you can kind of look out 1 to 5 years for and say, okay, maybe I should start saving in cash for those objectives.
Yeah, and since we're around the holidays, I mean, you could start saving early in the year for your holiday shopping list down the road. It would be nice to be able to have that cash available. And some people do that. They have, they call them Christmas accounts or whatever, and they have that set aside, and that way they're not putting money on credit cards when they're out buying their gifts. And I think those are great things to think about as you're planning out your year.
This is really important because I think as we're talking about cash reserves, and we'll talk more about rates, but as we talk about cash reserves and how to manage this and how much do you need, for unexpected or expected, it does ultimately come, back to a conversation around cash flow and how you're managing cash flow and how you're allocating any surplus you have towards building and maintaining your cash reserve. And so I think in the way that budgeting and managing cash flow is kind of a personal journey, everybody has a slightly different way to accomplish the same thing. Whatever works for you there, it's kind of the same thing on the cash management. It's not going to be the same for everyone. It's going to be
yes. So there's even cash management as part of the equation. But all right, so we got the emergency fund set aside. We might have some cash management buckets that we're putting money into. And then we have these longer term projects where we're thinking about 1 to 3 years, 1 to 5 years in the future, where we might do a major home remodel, where we might purchase a new house, where we might want to, we have a child or something like that. So just major sort of expenses. We want to have a pot of money set aside where if we're going to go and access it, it's not invested in the market and it's not down like it could have been, halfway through the year, down 20%. You'd be really kicking yourself had you kept all your cash in the market this year and needed it.
Yeah, exactly. The looking ahead at what you have coming up in terms of expenses or life planning that you're doing, maintaining the cash reserve or building it to a point where you want it, it does take discipline because, for some period of time, you may be putting, saving into your cash reserves for expenses that are 2, 3, 4, 5 years away. But you really don't want to put that money to work, say, invested in the stock market, because, we don't want to have any market risk tied to those dollars that you're going to need in the very near term.
Or, you can do it. You just have to be understand the risks that you're taking. And, some people are willing to do that with the understanding that that money may not be there when they need it. So, part of all this is, understanding the risks associated with these decisions and then making those decisions based on your comfort level and so forth. So, so that is part of it. So let's move on to, we've talked a little bit about, what we're saving. But the rates have gotten better on just plain old savings account. You're not you're now not earning 0.001% on your cash reserves.
Yeah, so rates have gone up, here in 2022. And, there's been a whole lot of, there's been a big increase in the number of just kind of headlines out there around this topic. So, where to put your cash. There's a lot. I look back just over the past month, there's, 2-3 dozen different articles on, how to buy different types of certificates of deposit, CDs, or even, short-term U.S. government bonds, so T-bills. So there's a whole lot of kind of noise out there at the moment around that topic, but rates have absolutely gone up. And I think as we look at what's available, for you to put your, where to put your cash, honoring, kind of the safety that you need for your cash reserves is really important. So looking for FDIC protected types of depository instruments. So high yield savings, money market, or certificates of deposit. Those offer that protection. You're not going to lose money looking at those types of cash vehicles. In just this kind of very recent, few weeks and month, there's been definitely more uptick in interest around short-term U.S. government bonds, so treasury bills or T-bills. And the thought there is that right now we're kind of in a bit of a slightly unique situation where the shortest term government bonds or T-bills, they're paying more than the longer term government bonds. So you can earn more interest on a 6-month T-bill than you can on a 10-year. And it's drawn a lot of attention. Say, okay, maybe I should put some cash into some of these T-bills, to get a higher rate than I get on my cash. A couple of points to consider here. Number one, I think first look at the spread, the difference between what you can get on a high-yielding CD of an equivalent maturity. So if you're looking at a 6-month or a 12-month treasury bill as an option, compare that to what you could get with a certificate of deposit. Because the treasury bills, ultimately, they do carry some risk. They carry interest rate risk. So if you put all your cash reserves into a 12-month treasury bill, for example, rates paying you more than you probably were getting in your savings account. So there's the kind of attractive appeal there. Let's say 6 months down the road, you need to tap into the money that you put into that T-bill. You're going to have to go out onto the secondary market and sell the T-bill. If interest rates have gone up since the point in time where you bought your T-bill initially, you're going to lose money when you go to sell it on the secondary market. So there is that interest rate risk, that comes with that strategy. So I think first and foremost, we do look to FDIC, protected.
Yeah, and so let's just go back to what we talked about earlier in terms of why we're putting money away in cash. So we have this, we have our regular monthly expenses that we should probably keep in our checking account. So your paycheck comes in, you want to have enough in your checking account at least to cover, your expenses for the month, let's say. And then you might want to have this other reserve. Your emergency funds might be in the savings account where it's completely liquid. It's going to earn a little bit more money than the checking account. But there's no penalties. There's no interest rate risk to get in and out of it. And it's just available and accessible. And then as we start to plan for those longer term expenses, like we talked about earlier, then I think that's a place where we start looking at trying to tie the investment vehicles, like you talked about, the short-term bonds or the CDs, to those actual purchases. So, for some people, for example, if let's say they in 2023 they sell a stock or something like that, and they know they're going to have a large tax bill, but it's not going to be due until April of 2024. You could actually tie that savings. You could put it in a 1-year CD so that it matures right before that's due, and you could potentially earn a little bit more money. You maybe try and maximize your cash needs. So that's like the third step in the process, I think, is tying your investments to your purchases.
I think that ties in really well, that idea of, kind of looking ahead. And this, I think, falls under the category of, expected or planned types of expenses. When you look at your cash reserves, at all times, you need to have the unexpected, reserve amount in completely liquid instruments. So high yield savings, money market, one of those types of vehicles. And for cash that you may need, and it may be kind of allocated towards, some expenses in the, say 12 to 24 months time frame, whatever that is, then you can kind of look to stagger some of these different cash vehicles with different maturities. The kind of language that's around that, there's a lot of, kind of talk about, bond ladders or CD ladders, but the basic idea is that you're staggering the maturity lengths of these types of instruments to coincide with when you're going to need the money. So that really fits well with those types of planned cash needs.
Yeah, and I think we can do a whole other episode, which we will try and do on that conversation that's been coming up a lot about, the bond ladder versus the bond mutual fund or ETF, and just the pros and cons of doing each of those. So that's a really good segue to one of our future episodes.
Yeah. And I think I do want to make a point on that, though, Jim. I think that's a really good point, because I think they are separate conversations. When, the conversation we're having today is specifically around cash management and cash reserves. And you can kind of construct these, call them mini ladders, CD ladders or bond ladders. I like to just think of it as kind of staggering your cash needs or staggered maturities for these things. Because when we think of a real bond ladder, I think that's much more of a conversation around a more substantial portion of your portfolio of resources.
So that's like, how do I invest in my fixed income portion of my portfolio? So one thing I'm going to touch on, Jake, and one thing I'm going to touch on, which I just happened to pop up, an article popped up on my homepage today, and it was about, I'm interested to get your take on this, it's about potentially not paying taxes on savings accounts. And it was sort of, the headline was, let me see if I can find it real quick. The headline was, let's see here. Here's how the rich avoid paying savings account taxes, which was really interesting. So it certainly got my attention, and I had a feeling of where it was going. But the idea behind the article was, hey, if you got some savings, you could put it into your Roth IRA or your IRA or your HSA, and you could defer those taxes on those savings accounts, or they could grow tax free from that perspective. Do you have any perspective on that? I have a little that I'll share, but
yeah, I mean, I think this goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where as we're identifying how much do we need in cash reserves, we also need to look at liquidity across your entire financial situation, and how and when and under what circumstances and with what penalties and taxes can you access money from different types of accounts. So yeah, I mean, the Roth IRA, that can come in a pinch in certain ways. A traditional IRA, a 401k, you can tap into these under certain circumstances to get money that you may need. But is it optimal to do that? I think as kind of a default assumption, we want to assume we want our cash needs to come from cash sources. And yeah, you can hold cash in these different types of accounts, but I'm talking about, cash instruments. So, FDIC, insured and protected, depository accounts, certificates of deposit, or kind of with a little bit of a stretch, we're talking about those, short-term government bonds. As kind of a proxy.
Yeah. So when I was reading that, I agree with what you're saying. I mean, the only place where I felt it could be applicable was some people, once they get into this retirement phase of their life, and I've seen this example over and over and over again with clients. They're like, hey, I'm going to take out $50,000 from my IRA and put it in my cash account because I just want that cash available to myself. And it's an interesting concept. It just feels good to have that cash there. But you could also just leave that cash in your IRA, because once you take it out of your IRA, you're going to be paying taxes on that, or just to sit in a different account. So I don't know if you've ever run into that, but I run into that quite a bit.
No, definitely run into that. And I'm really glad that's the point that you made, because we were talking about identifying cash reserve amounts. We really only talked about pre-retirement, but this is the conversation around retirement and cash reserves, because I think that example you just gave is kind of a case in point example. You may not want to take $50,000 out of a 401k or an IRA, pay the taxes on it just so it can sit in, a cash account. You can hold a cash position within a tax deferred account type. And that can and does serve, once you're in retirement, as part of your cash reserves. And it's important to think about and plan for cash needs, both expected and unexpected, in how you manage the portfolio and manage the cash within the portfolio in your set of accounts over time.
Yeah, you nailed it. So anyways, yeah, that's the one I want to bring up as part of that. It's interesting. You just got to look at your big picture, and you got to look at what age you are and whether you have access to those accounts without penalties, and what your tax situation is. There's just so much to think about, as opposed to just, how much should I have in cash reserves, emergency fund. It's just a little bit more thorough conversation. So, so anyways, go ahead.
And I do. I just want to make kind of one last point, and I think it's a question to throw out to you, which is, when we look across the board, in the United States, what percentage of Americans do you think are able to come up with $1,000 on an immediate, moment's notice?
I think it's really low, 15 to 20%.
Yeah, it's over half. So it's around 60%, 56% of Americans can't come up with $1,000 they need, in a pinch. And that could be, it's not kind of income dependent. There could be folks that have, high income that also can't, come up with $1,000 at, a moment's notice. So I think that's just kind of an eye-opening statistic, just to point out, okay, there's a need, I think, across the board to be thinking about cash reserves, how to maintain those, how much to maintain in that. And I think just, again, that discipline that goes with keeping it there in cash. And it's a little bit easier to be disciplined when you're earning a little bit more on the cash. So I think we're kind of entering that territory.
Yeah. And I'm just going to finish with what you said earlier, that life happens, and those expenses tend to come up all the time. And so to be prepared for them, if you can, believe me, I understand it's difficult with families, and there's all kinds of different factors that are pulling at your wallet. But being as prepared as possible will be really helpful when you get in the pinch. Jake, we're going to keep it under 30 minutes. We're at 29 minutes, 38 seconds. So I think we hit a record here under 30 minutes. So with that, I'm going to wish you well, and have a great day. Thank you.
Same to you. Thanks, everybody.